So it's great to be here on the latest podcast with my friend Kenny Miller. Hi, Kenny.
Hi Don, good to see you.
Good to see you. So I was going to say introduce you as writer, journalist, consultant, big Hibs fan.
I think you've covered most things there. It's like you're a versatile player at a team, not particularly outstanding in one field, but can do a job in various positions.
You're wanting flexibility in today's world, Kenny, I think.
That's the positive spin on it. I'll take that.
I know. And of course, is it Campbelltown you're from?
The accent's a wee bit all over the place now because I've been away for so long. But yeah, Campbelltown, born and bred, me and the family. So
That's a
get back
great part of the world.
It's not great for producing footballers. But in terms of growing up, and maybe we'll go on to talk about these things. But in terms of growing up and the space to kick a ball about and quality of life and stuff, yeah, very very lucky to have the upbringing we did in Campbelltown.
Because that's one thing, Kenny. I've noticed speaking to all the guys I know, both on the podcast and just on courses and at clubs, the importance at a young age of that, of being able to go out with your mates and kick a football and street football. Do you think that's missing now growing up for young players?
Remember doing a lot of work with Andy McLaren's A&M Foundation at one point, and that was always his thing that Glasgow in particular was losing the street football culture. And yeah, I always feel old when I say these things because I'm only 34 myself, but I know that myself and my two younger brothers, we were 10 minutes along the road from the school and 2 minutes around the corner from the local park, and that's all we did. It was jumpers for goalposts, and we were happy until you were shouted in for your dinner. I read the stuff about 10,000 hours resulting in excellence, and that definitely passed us by. It's obviously 10,000 deliberate hours with very strategic practice, so something passed us by. But no, there was nothing better than going around and kicking a ball about. And I think it's a shame that everything. I can understand the benefits of structured play and all that now, but it is a shame that kids are less able just to go and knock a ball about.
I think that is a great point. I know you're joking about the 10,000 hours, but for the vast majority of people, that's a big chunk of that 10,000 hours was when you were playing out with your mates and the ball was coming off the curb and you have to learn angles and you wouldn't be explicitly doing and feedback and adjusting, but that street football and playing with your mates, I think, is a huge kind of advantage.
I think even just some of our best experiences with our dad were just going to the park and him not taking it easy on us when we were wee, but it breeds a bit of resilience in you. And I was probably the same with two younger brothers. You don't take it easy on them, and then they grow up and they catch up on you, and you get your own back in later life at five-a-side. But no, I really appreciate the simple things like being able to have kicked the ball about with them for so long. And it maybe sounds daft now, but it meant a lot, and it means a lot. I think everybody should have that kind of basic football introduction.
So say growing up in Campbelltown, Kenny, was it always football you were interested in, or did you do different sports?
Probably the world's worst ever shinty player in primary school. I remember we went on a 7-8 hour bus trip through a blizzard to go and play in a tournament in Inverness, and we came back without even scoring. So a terrible shinty player. It was really only ever football for us. We were getting narrow-minded when it came to that. Football obsessive family, and it was always football for us. If you weren't playing it, you were travelling to watch it, or Richard Gordon was almost the soundtrack to your childhood because he'd be on Sports Sound or all the usual things, Panini sticker books, all that stuff.
And I know you're a big Hibs fan. How did the Hibs connection come about?
It's a bit strange given from Campbelltown you can see Ireland from the beach. It's not exactly the local club. Basically, our grandpa was a glory hunter back in the 50s when Hibs were the darlings of Scottish football. They were playing well, winning things, and it's almost been a character building curse of birth ever since for the generations that followed. But it's never dull, and I always feel quite lucky that we've had that, because again I do think it breeds a bit of resilience, because you need to endure so many kicks in the teeth to get your Scottish Cup finals in 2016. I can't imagine what it would be like to support a big club where everything's pretty plain sailing. So, not even that was beneficial, even if it sometimes didn't feel like it at the time.
Did you never feel the pressure to get pulled over to the old farm?
Not at all. I found it really dull. They just won every week, and then the one day, and it didn't mean as much to them. So the one day where once in a blue moon when Hibs would beat Celtic or Rangers, you'd be running into school just to noise everybody up. So no, never ever had pangs of regret about supporting one of the big two.
So who was your Hibs hero growing up then for you?
It's probably been two significant players in my Hibs supporting life. When I was a kid, it was Frank Sosey, because I mean when he arrived, when Hibs were in the first division, I'd never seen a player like him. He should never really have been at Hibs. I think Irvine Welsh called him a casual colossus. He was just a really impressive guy, hugely impressive player. So he would be the dominant figure from the Chelsea. John Collins, a good pal of yours, was someone I had so much respect for. My younger brother Colin was actually named after him. But I suppose when I got older and having done the jobs that I've done, Lewis Stevenson has probably eclipsed Frank Sosey, which sounds ridiculous because Lewis himself would be mortified at that. But he's someone I've known since he was 18 or 19. He's toughed it out at Hibs all this time. He's had probably more lows than highs, but he's now the most decorated player in the club's history. And more than anything, he's a great role model and a good guy. So two sort of contrasting influences and heroes. Lewis would be absolutely mortified that we talk about him like that, but he means a lot to the club and the support.
Because how many games has he played then for Hibs, Kenny?
Lewis is something I should know this, given that I'll undoubtedly write the big memoir one day. But he's very high up the list of all-time appearances, and again, he's mortified to be in the company of people like Pat Stanton on these lists. But he really has toughed it out, and current left back Josh Doig's in demand from a few big clubs. So Lewis might yet see off another pretender, get his spot back next year.
Brilliant. Now, how did you, in Campbelltown there, how did you go on the journey to be a journalist? How did you get into writing?
Started very early on. I vividly remember a conversation with my dad when I was about 10, when he let me know in no uncertain terms that I was never going to play for Hibs. And I think he told me that when I was 10, and he probably could have done it 5 years earlier, but he was maybe protecting my fragile ego. But no, from about the age of 10, I knew I wanted to be a football writer, and that was all consuming. I'd be writing match reports from the TV. I had a show on local radio on Argyll FM, must have had about 10 listeners, but Monday Night Football Focus at the age of 14.
That's incredible. I never knew that.
I'd be writing to managers and players, and some of them were really good with their time. People like Craig Levine and Craig Brown would write back and come on the show, Rob McLean and a few others. So I actually think, in terms of, again, talk about 10,000 hours, I had done probably hundreds of interviews by the time I'd started at the Sunday Post at 17, when I really got my break. So I'd probably made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot along the way before I'd even had a proper crack at it. So that was really, although I'm laughing about it now, that was probably really good experience. And that dictated the subjects that I really tried hard in school, and everything went from there, really.
So from there, because that you've obviously kind of homed into that, as you said, at an early age, and had the discipline to stick with it. But who influenced you at that age, Kenny? Who was your influences?
When we were 14, we won a competition in the Scottish Sun as Scottish football's most devoted family, because we would travel home and away to watch Hibs, and the prize was a trip to the World Cup in Japan, the first round game of your choice. And I remember a journalist called Ewan Smith, who now does great stuff for the Courier in Dundee. He was dispatched from Glasgow to come to Campbelltown, which must have been the shortest straw imaginable. And we shared a back page with Frank Sosey that week. It was the week he was appointed Hibs manager. And Ewan made such an impression on me as a 14-year-old, because at the time Scotland were looking for a new manager, and they were being linked with a guy called Philippe Troussier. So Ewan, who is the least likely looking person to be as fluent and skilled in French as he is, went away and sat in our living room and was phoning contacts in France in fluent French to chase down this Philippe Troussier link. And I remember just being so impressed by him and what he was all about. And Ewan got me work experience in there when I was 14, and things kind of went from there. I was about halfway through my sixth year at school. I was going to go to Napier University when the job at the Sunday Post came up. It was my grandpa had spotted a wee square in the back of in the paper on a Sunday to say they were looking for a sports reporter, and I've no doubt I was the cheapest person that applied. I got lucky with that, and moved to Glasgow just after turning 17 to to start that life.
So if your granda spotted that, it sounds as if your family around you were really supportive of the writing as a career or as a passion.
Oh, massively. I should probably tell my mum and dad this more, but we didn't really go away on many holidays when we were young. They never spent any money on themselves. So my dad's horrific wardrobe would attest to that. There's some really questionable suits in there for his work, but every penny that they worked hard to earn would go on our football experience, whether it was summer camps at Inverclyde in the National Performance Centre, or even it was quite expensive just to go and watch Hibs
Yeah.
every
So
week.
how many hours would it have been there and back?
I mean, it was 4.5 just from Campbelltown to Edinburgh. You would train yourself to fall asleep as quickly as possible on the drive. It would be Robbie Shepherd on the radio on the way back, but again, that's twofold. It was probably expensive and time consuming for them, but for us, it was some of the best memories we ever had. Even when you've gone to Pittodrie and it's probably a 14-hour round trip and you've lost 1-0, you've not had a shot at goal. But I look back now and think about how lucky we were, and probably a byproduct of not getting into any bother.
Yeah.
Really, as kids, it was probably because all our weekends were spent travelling or playing football or going to watch it. So yeah, nobody needs to tell us the benefit of sport or the wider benefits of football.
That's incredible. So you would go to away games as well for Hibs?
They would pick and choose them. I'll never forgive them for not letting me go. Hibs had a great game with AEK Athens midweek. Didn't get to go to that one because it was a school night. So they were. My mum's a teacher, just recently retired, so they were quite strict when it came to that stuff. But no, we went to as many games as we could, and no, I mean, I don't ever remember getting the football bug. It was just you were born into it. It was, yeah.
That's just a great story, Kenny, about how supportive your whole family were, the football bit, and I'm sure your mum, being a teacher, was really aware of the importance of education for you as well.
I think she gave up on me applying myself too well in the sciences or maths pretty early on. I think she probably tried her best, but I remember being adamant early on this is what I was going to do. And it sounds daft, but because I was obsessed with Frank Sosie at a young age and Zinedine Zidane, probably for different reasons, that definitely helped me stick in at French more, and then Spanish latterly in school as well, because I do think subconsciously that football creates this interest in different cultures and different countries and players and stuff. So definitely benefited from things like that as well. But no, my mum, she tried her best, but I was probably a lost cause from pretty early on.
Oh, it doesn't sound like it. So you the Sunday Post, I would have to admit, I love every time I hear the Sunday Post. Growing up in the Highlands, the Sunday Post was there, wasn't it? It's almost the typical Highland Sunday newspaper.
I remember I must have annoyed a Celtic fan on Twitter with something I'd written, and I remember them mocking up an Ur Willie cartoon to say another piece of rubbish written by that Kenny Miller and sending me this mock cartoon via Twitter. My mum was pleased with that. I remember she printed that out and framed it in the house. So that Celtic fan that meant to ruin my day, it had unexpected benefits. It was a great DC Thompson. I mean, they're doing some really amazing progressive things now. They've had a bit of a change of direction and they're going all digital. But I mean, back then it was a great breeding ground and a really good learning experience. But I was really just chucked straight in at 17, and I tried to mimic the older people or the older journalists that I saw at different newspapers, and I didn't know anyone within the industry. I had barely any experience of Glasgow, never mind living on my own. But there were some really great operators at different papers that didn't have to speak to me or look after me, but they did, and they're all still on the scene just now. But it was a great early introduction to it all.
It's funny because I've noticed over the last year or so, sometimes on a Sunday I'll go back to buying the Sunday Post if I just want to kind of almost go back to my roots, because I know there'll be something there. It's just to the point and it's clear and it'll not be flowery, and it'll be relevant to where I'm from, I suppose.
Yeah, it doesn't take much in Scotland or Scottish life, whether it's football or politics, for a media source to be written off as left or right or Celtic or Rangers, whereas I think the Sunday Post was probably regarded as being pretty straight down the middle, and the sports desk's still largely untouched from the team that was there when I started. So Yep, I remember being sat down by the guy, Ron Ross, that gave me my job, and he bought me a pint of orange juice in the station bar in Glasgow, and I basically told to get on with it, and it was all good fun.
So talking about the writing there, Kenny, how old were you when you went to the Sunday Post then? How old would you
I
be?
just turned 17.
17. So who would be influencing your writing at that point about your approach to it and how you did things?
You talk about the support that I got from my family. One of the things my dad always did was insisted that I read as much as possible, whether it was books or. But every day he would buy a tabloid and a broadsheet. More often than not, it was the Scottish Sun and the Herald, so that I had a mix of. So that I was taking in a variety of styles. And again, I probably look back and think that was pretty influential. I always thought Darrell Broadfoot was good. But I mean, we had a conversation before we came on, and Hugh MacDonald remains the guy who I would love to write like when I grow up. But there's only one Hugh MacDonald. There's so many talented operators in Scotland that can do different things, whether it's breaking stories or feature writing, and that master these different disciplines. But Hugh certainly would be right up. And he's a great guy as well.
Oh, I know, totally a great guy.
I don't want to do these things. The two of us should steer away from playing up his ego anymore.
I know. I loved when I was speaking to him, and we were speaking about old, going to football matches, and Hugh was speaking about going to football matches in the 60s where you wouldn't see football on TV as much, and he had as he does, a great description. He said he would go to see someone like Di Stefano, and they were like mythical creatures. What a great description.
I think we were saying off air, I think some of Hughes' best stuff comes as a result of the varied life experiences he had. I mean, my first real job was the Sunday Post, and all I've really known is that existence, whereas Hughes done all sorts of things, and you can tell that it helps shape his work. And it's no coincidence that people who would be naturally wary of the media, like the Murrays, trust him so much, and it's an achievement enough to get people like that in your confidence, and Hugh makes it look so effortless. So as much as he's self-deprecating and he writes with a bit of flair and panache, like he's a serious guy, and I keep saying serious operator.
Yeah, great. And so was it sport you were writing on at the Post, Kenny, or was it all different things?
It was predominantly football. You turn your hands to different sports occasionally. But again, no, the tunnel vision. I was probably a real pain in the boss's ear, to be honest. I was always nipping in his ear to get to more games or to do more stuff or pushing news lines that I'd heard, and I must have been a nightmare looking back. But I was just really keen to work hard and sort of earn your stripes, I suppose.
And see, because on the podcast, I'll speak to a lot of players, and I'll be speaking to them about their ambitions. As a writer, would you have that? Would you say, "Oh, I'm wanting to go to this paper, or I'm wanting to be published there, or I'm wanting to do this"? Did you have clear goals as a writer?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I grew up. Another thing, I grew up reading FourFourTwo Magazine, and so from the age of from 2008, I've been contributing to FourFourTwo. The guys have always been great with me, so that was a sort of bucket list thing ticked off. The Scottish Sun was the tabloid that I read growing up, and they had pretty extensive football coverage. So when I went there, that was, I suppose, another ambition realised. But so I knew roughly the things I wanted to do. And I think that helped, because it was sort of able to work back the way and say, well, what do I need to do to get there? What were the steps? Instead of thinking there was a shortcut to any of these things, I always thought, like, what do you need to put in place to hopefully get there one day?
Yeah. And how long did you stay at the Sunday Post for then?
I was 9 years at the Sunday Post, so it was a good innings there.
Yeah, good innings. And what got you to move? What was the circumstances that got you in for a transfer?
It was a sports. Again, there was probably a lot of luck involved. There was a sports journalist at the Scottish Sun, Paul Hughes, who's now working out in Qatar. He's involved in the media side of things for the World Cup. So he was moving out there, and I think he'd put my name in. And I don't mind this at all. I can sympathise with the new Celtic manager when he's been asked about being second choice. I think they'd asked 2 or 3 people ahead of me, and it came down to me and another guy to go for an interview. And I remember they took me for an informal interview, Ian King and Roger Hanna. They took me to a Chinese restaurant, and it was chopsticks only, and a boy from Campbelltown's never picked up a pair of chopsticks in his life. So I remember that was more nerve-wracking than the actual conversation, but managed to talk my way into it. I think Ian and Roger had both been young journalists in their own right, so they'd maybe been able to identify or saw something. But yeah, I was whether I was 10th choice or 20th choice or whatever for that one. It was a lucky break, and that was a real education as well.
And what was the difference then working at the Sun to the Sunday Post, or was it fundamentally the same?
I suppose with the Sunday Post, you could really start your work for the week on Friday afternoon. I mean, that wasn't deliberate, but it tended to be when a lot of the press conferences would be, or the news lines would come in, and then there would be an intense period at the end of the week trying to get everything turned around. Whereas I do remember the first day at the Sun, and there was almost imposter syndrome a wee bit, where you're thinking, oh, what do I do now? They seem so busy, and they always just let you get on with it. There was never really any pressure. You were almost allowed to find your feet, and everybody had different skill sets, whether it was the old firm or younger players, veterans. Everybody complemented each other. It was a really well put together team. So they did just let you get on with it and find your feet. But I do remember that first day thinking, right, what am I doing here? What do I do now?
Oh, and did you develop a? I know you're focused on football, but was there? Did you develop a speciality or a specialism within football? Was it games? Was it features? Was it Hibs?
When I was at the Sunday Post, I went to every game that I could at any level. I don't think I thought about it in these terms at the time, but it was really beneficial in terms of meeting people from all levels of the game who would then go on to. I mean, everybody goes their own direction, but Ross Wilson at Rangers is a good friend of mine, and he was someone I met by chance at the Sunday Post. As I said, Lewis Stevenson, I met as an 18-year-old, and you do form lasting relationships with some of these people that pay off professionally later on. But I think the Sun were very supportive in terms of me tracking and building relationships with younger players. They would spend the money to send me away with the Scotland under 17s, the 19s, 21s on occasion, and really support that in a way that I think a lot of journalists maybe don't get the luxury now because there's been so many cutbacks. But they were very supportive in terms of sending me to places. I had some unbelievable experiences travelling abroad, and you never took that stuff for granted. So no, I had so much rapport. Roger Hanna, as a sports editor, is somebody who could do any job in the country, as far as I'm concerned, in any industry. He was just such a great people person and an organizer. So I was very lucky who I worked with.
So with the Euros just finishing there, what was it like covering a tournament, an international tournament, as a journalist? What's that experience like?
So I can't say I ever got to that level with the Scottish Sun. There was a lot of people ahead of me in the queue for that. I remember travelling to do under 17 tournaments, and that was enough of a thrill for me, going to Bulgaria and Belgium and countries all over. And you'll have worked with a lot of the young boys that I know now. And yeah, I was always a bit of a patriot. Always good to go and follow Scotland in all these places, and just privilege, I suppose, is the word that I keep coming back to. When I went on to the Scottish FA from the Sun, and I ended up being away at the Toulon tournament in the south of France for 3 weeks, and I remember just thinking, it's ridiculous that you would be paid to go and have this experience. So football, just the same for yourself. Football opens so many unexpected doors and gives you experiences that a lot of people aren't fortunate enough to get.
I know that's true, Kenny. And just before we go on to the SFA and you working at the SFA, as a journalist, what was it like? Say covering, as you said there, a patriot. Say covering a national team. How does a journalist deal with that thing about being a fan and being a critic?
I think it's probably easier when you don't support Celtic or Rangers. I was able to be very honest about being a Hibs supporter. I like to think that makes you a bit more relatable to the reader, because there's no one's ever become a sports journalist having not supported a club.
Yeah.
I find that hard to believe, and it is easier to admit when you support probably a smaller club. But you do become conditioned to sitting on your hands. I remember when I went back to watching Hibs as a fan, when I went to the Scottish FA, it took me a little while to be deconditioned. There'd be a split second delay to celebrate goals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
All bets were off really when you were covering Scotland games. but you almost internalise everything, I suppose. It's the press box is a professional environment, and you can't really be doing cartwheels or shouting abuse at people. So when Hibs won the cup in 2016, I was in the press box working that day and probably doing somersaults in my head, but I like to think a reasonably calm exterior on the outside.
Great. And then you moved, as you said, from the sand to the SFA, did you?
Yeah, that was never really part of the plan. I'd never really thought about working directly in football. I was really happy in the job I was in, working with great people and like I said, a great boss. It was very much a heart over head decision, and I'm glad I did it. Again, I was lucky with Roger Hanna. I had another unbelievable boss in Greg Mailer, who had worked at Hibs previously, had hired my younger brother, so I knew Greg. And yeah, it sounds really cheesy and really cliche, but every day I walked into Hampden, I'm overusing the word, but again, privilege. I just felt so lucky, and it would take me half an hour to get to my desk every morning because there was so many interesting people involved in all levels of the game, and it was such a positive experience, such an eye opener, and I've definitely learned more about the game in the last 3 or 4 years on this side of it than I did in the previous 14 in the media. I would recommend that every journalist does a bit of both, because it definitely helps to give you an all-round picture.
So would you have had to kind of pivot how you did things then? So you're used to describing and writing pieces, and your role at the SFA would be, from a writing point of view, would be quite different in some ways, was it? Or was it similar?
Like my colleagues would tell you, I was always really bland and dull, so it wasn't much of a transition to sticking on a razor. I probably, as a writer, my biggest criticism of myself would be that sometimes I could be too soft. I was probably naturally quite protective of players, when really sometimes you should be a bit firmer or harder in your analysis or your verdict. So a young goalkeeper, it would never be a howler. It was an unfortunate mistake, that type of thing, or a mix-up or something. So I think the protection side of it probably came quite naturally when I went to Hampden. It was a really varied workload. I was in charge of the communications around the disciplinary process, which is always fun and games up here. The Scottish Cup was brilliant because no one's got a bad word to say about the Scottish Cup. Everyone loves it. And then the national youth teams, again, was a passion, because you'll know Scott Gemmell and these people, they always feel so honoured to be in there and wearing the badge and stuff, and just to be around those guys and on trips with them and picking their brains was an honour in itself.
And then did you go from the SFA to your LAV, your club?
I did. Yeah, my younger brother Colin, he was communications manager at Hibs, and he had moved into a different role. So on paper, the dream job. I really wish it had come up a few years down the line, because I loved it at Hampden so much, but it was a hard one to turn down. My girlfriend lived in Edinburgh at the time, and it made sense for a lot of reasons, but it was the most difficult decision to leave Hampden, because I'm still in touch with them all, and some of them are probably closer to family than they are friends. But I couldn't turn down Hibs, and I suppose the best bits of the job at the Scottish FA were the games, and they were every few months. So the big appeal was obviously weekly games. So no, life was never dull.
And how did that feel? I know we're speaking about how privileged you feel and thing, but how did it feel when the first day at Hibs, being a Hibs supporter all your life and going in there kind of to work?
It's funny. I probably took, and Colin and I talk about this a lot, even now. Colin's now at the Commonwealth Games, Team Scotland, and I've moved on, but we talk about it a lot, that we probably cared too much about everything, every minute detail, whether it was a Happy Highby raffle ticket, everything had to be done properly to a new signing. You would obsess because it meant so much to you, and you know it means so much to other people. So there's a lot of friends and family I probably haven't seen much of in the last 3 years, because it becomes, yourself, it becomes all consuming 24/7. You probably lose all sense of balance. It goes out the window. But I suppose the thing that always, and I would stop posting on my own social media channels. You almost kind of disappear from public life, and you become this faceless behind the scenes type. But the thing we always tried to keep in mind was who are you doing it for, and what are you doing it for. And I think you can produce the most polished best bit of content in the world that looks great on a show reel or looks good in your CV, but if a supporter can't relate to it, then it's pretty pointless. So that was always the motivation to do stuff that people like.
I think that's a great point, Kenny. So if you were looking at, you've been in football and writing, all your life there up until now, and what changes have you seen in the game and how it's played, or even the organisation around it? Have you noticed changes?
I think social media has made a big impact in terms of, I suppose maybe it's similar. Players would always say, managers would always say, "Oh, I don't read the papers," but know every single word that was in it and what their rating was on a match day. And now they all know what's said about them on social media and forums. But I've seen the toll that a throwaway comment from someone can have on a young player in particular. I suppose an experienced one as well. So social media, so many positives to it, but I've also seen what the negatives can do, and the scrutiny that then, I think the managerial success or failure has become so condensed now. It used to be you maybe get 2 or 3 transfer windows or something. Now you get a few weeks because there's so much external noise. So I think a big part of it now is about filtering that noise, what's valuable, what's not. So I think probably the noise around the game has probably changed the most. But I do think the last year and a half has been a healthy reminder of how important supporters are and how they really make the game, because as much as it was great to be going to games with Hibs, it was a bit of a soulless experience at times. You kind of question what you're doing it for when there's no one in the stands.
Yeah. And from there, Kenny, that point, because there's a great point about the social media and the impact it can have on people. And, from being on both sides of the fence, would you have any advice to young players about how they deal with that? Because you can't, it's almost like you can't pretend it's not there, isn't it? It is there all the time.
Yeah, there's a few players I suppose I sort of informally help with their social media, and I suppose my advice is probably something they think is really dull, but I do think that social media should be a window for your professionalism when you're a player, because I know players that have lost out on life-changing moves as a result of something daft they've done when they were 14 or 15 with their friends. Good people, talented boys who in 180 characters or something had made this life-altering move. So it sounds daft. So I do think it should be a window for your professionalism. Personally speaking, it sounds really daft. I don't think you should swear. I would keep the night out stuff to a minimum. I think, again, it comes back to what the supporters want to see. They want to see somebody who appreciates being a player. They want to see somebody who works hard, that takes their craft seriously. And I think the England players just now are a great example of how you can shape your own narrative and influence the way people think about you. And there's no reason why there can't be a Scottish Marcus Rashford. Marcus Rashford's no different from a John McGinn or an Andy Robertson, a Kieran Tierney, sort of relatable people who just happen to be footballers.
Yeah, I would agree with you totally, Kenny, because I would sense definitely from yesterday, looking at all the social media and after everything what's gone on with the Euros, I could see a kind of sea change, in people, how people relate to players and players' influence. It's been there all along, but it's almost one of those moments where it explodes, isn't it? The awareness.
I think you can see the difference in treatment. Someone that missed the penalty, even Gareth Southgate in Euro '96, I dare say his face was morphed into some sort of vegetable in the national newspaper. Yeah. He did the Pizza Hut adverts and he was a figure of fun, whereas I think there has been more of a protective arm thrown around the 3 boys that missed, and an appreciation of them as people. Now, obviously, the flip side is all the predictable abuse that I think everybody knew was going to come. Yeah. A different story, but there is maybe a maturity to some of the coverage that might not have been there previously, which I think can only be a good thing. And that certainly, when you ask what I've learned in my limited time and directly in football and stuff, I think it's about the human impact. And you see boys that pull themselves together that shouldn't be fit enough to go and play in games, and just things that fans don't see, and sometimes sacrifices people within the game make to do something they love. And I think you always have to come back to these guys are just people, very lucky to be doing what they do, but it can also take a big toll on them. So I've been sort of reassured by the coverage around the England players, and I think they come across as a really likeable bunch. And that also doesn't happen by accident, because a few of them have done daft things in the time, but I think the way they're telling their story directly through social media channels, which is the upside of it. But also they've got some good people around them who are maybe nudging them in the right direction. But
I think that's kind of great advice or pointers or observations, kind of, because you know, people can say different things about social media, isn't it? Saying, oh, I just did that for a joke, or I just did that, I didn't mean that. But people will take it as a reflection of you or your professionalism, won't they?
yeah, and at times it can be totally unfair because there's very little nuance in social media. There's no shades of grey,
Yeah,
and yeah, I've seen players and I've seen people that I really care about get themselves into bother over the years on it, and sometimes they shy away from it without realizing that there are so many positives that can come from it if you harness maybe your personality, the best bits of it, and your professionalism, and showcase that in the right way. And I think you can. John McGinn's a great example of that. You can do all of that without being deadly dull. John McGinn has this massive personality, but is also very relatable and professional. He's probably one of the best examples and exponents of it. Same with Andy Robertson. Well, guys like that. So as much as everybody's talking about the England people, there are so many people that we should be proud of within our own country.
and I think when you're mentioning that, I think that's a great point, because John McGinn, definitely I noticed his personality coming out more this summer through the social media I have. I noticed how funny he was, the things he was saying, and it's just a great tool, really, isn't it?
I think one of the things that I love so much about Scottish football is how authentic and how relatable it is. Relatable is probably another overused word, so stop me or beep it out if I keep using it. But I spoke to John McGinn for 442 Magazine before the Euros, and when he talks about the joy of being in a Panini sticker book for a big tournament, you know it's not a line, he's not ticking a box for some commercial partner, he really likes seeing his big meatball head in a Panini sticker book. And Andy Robertson, when he talks about his place in history, following in Colin Hendry's footsteps, you know he means it. And when you speak to Kieran Tierney, and he's a different type, but he is a competitor who wants to prove himself against these big names and these big people. So there's three different types there, but very similar in that they are still 100% relatable, and could be. Andy Robertson said a great thing about how they'd all come different ways, but they were essentially just wee boys that grew up jumpers for goalposts with the same dream, but different ways of getting there. So I think that's what I like about Scottish football, is that it's still so connected to supporters and traditions. And for all the problems in the game, I do hope that that's one thing that we always cling on to.
Yeah, and it's you know, a cliche, isn't it? But we have far more in common than we have in difference, really, isn't it? It's just so we're just talking in cliches now.
No, I like, but the cliches are cliches for a reason. I don't mind that. Goodness knows I've made a living of using enough of them, but I always thought I had more in common with a Hearts fan or someone like that, because you had these shared experiences, and none of us really had English teams growing up. I find that hard to relate to. It was always Hibs and Scotland, and one of the things I was happiest about over the summer was seeing so many wee kids wearing Scotland strips, because with Scotland players on the back of them, because that's a byproduct of the team doing better, but it's just not something that you've seen for long enough. And we things like that kind of come full circle to being back in Campbelltown kicking a ball, but that it really makes me happy when I see wee things like that.
And I love that, because, you know, growing up playing football, like everyone listening to this will do, is you never forget that feeling of being a wee boy kicking or a wee girl kicking the ball, do you? That you take that with you all your life.
You shouldn't. And I'm lucky enough that I've known Ryan Gauld and John Souttar and Andy Robertson since they were young guys, and there's a great picture of them when they were all living together when they were at the D90 down the park, just kicking a ball about. And I forget who's wearing what. One of them's got a Barcelona strip on, one of them's got a Spain strip on, and this is with like professional players playing first team football, but they're all jumping about, caked in mud, and the three of them, they're the same guys now that they were then. And I think it's a sad day when you see people lose that really basic love for the game, and that's probably when you should chuck it and do something else. But no, there's just so much to enjoy about it. It gives you so many life experiences. You learn so many different values from it. I think it's a great I sound like I'm preaching and on my high horse, but you can just take so much from football and sport. I don't know what people do without football or sport. I don't know what your conversation starter is at weddings. I don't know.
I know. I laugh about well, it's just because travelling so much especially when I was younger. I used to just buy a one-way ticket and head off somewhere, and early 80s I headed off to Israel, a one-way ticket, and arrived there, and all I spoke about, or what introduced me to people, it would have been the Scotland players at the time. That would have been 81, 82. It was Kenny Dalglish, it was Graham Souness, and I was on a kibbutz, and I was playing for the kibbutz football team, and it just opened so many friendships certainly in my life. It's just
Between a love of football and a Scottish accent, I think can take you a long way. I think two things that open a lot of doors for you.
I know, it's true. Now, we're talking about football and, footballers and social media. And I think one of the things that social media and almost the internet has opened up is the power for everyone to pick up a pen or have a keyboard and get their voice heard and their opinion heard about the game. If you had any advice to anyone that's wanting to get into your side of the business in relation to football, what would you say to them?
I would say, I suppose the modern day equivalent of me doing my local radio show on Argyle FM is to do your own podcast, or just to write a lot, read a lot, and just consume a variety of content, not just within your own echo chamber. I get a lot of stick from my friends because I listen to podcasts from different teams. I'll read a lot. I'll listen to a lot of stuff that I really don't like or I really disagree with. I read a lot of and consume a lot of really objectionable material just because I think it's good to get an all-round opinion, to be more informed. So I think just consume as much as you can, practice as much as you can. And I do think there was a real variety of people came in on work experience when I was at the Scottish Sun, and the ones that really stood out and impressed were the ones that were willing to roll their sleeves up and just get stuck in and didn't just expect to get a fast track to the Champions League or anything like that. Some of the best people and the best contacts I've made were, somebody like Ross Wilson. Ross is now sporting director at Rangers, and one of the most impressive people you'll meet within football. But he was somebody who volunteered at Falkirk when they were struggling, and I met him in his backroom role at Falkirk, and he's progressed. So I can't emphasise enough that I suppose the importance of a variety of contacts, but meeting different people, and everybody's valuable. Everyone's got an opinion worth listening to or a story worth exchanging. And I don't think you should ever look to be fast tracked to the top of it, but I think it's a lot of good managers sort of learn the ropes, don't they, on the way up.
I know. Do you read a lot outside football, Kenny? Do you do much?
I'm trying to. If I tilted the laptop to the side, there is shelves of books that I have not managed to read yet. I'm trying to get back into it, actually. It's one of the better things that's come from lockdown is trying to force myself, because I was a voracious reader back in the day, but I've slipped into a bad habit of just reading football and sport books. So I need to maybe consume a bit more fiction now. But no, I've always been a reader.
I find that fascinating, and it's almost kind of when I reflect on my own life now, and I think, how did I ever, at 13 or 14, I remember when I just used to play football, and I used to be one of the boys, and I used to be out and about in wee village in the Highlands, but I always used to go to the library on a Thursday night.
Yeah.
And I always remember picking out Jack Kerouac on the Road, the beatnik classic, and thinking, God, what is it about that? Did that just open my whole horizon up to travelling and being on the road? And I think reading has such a power to open horizons for people.
It's funny, the ones that make an impact on you as well. You could probably tell by looking at me, I'm not much of a runner, but I remember reading Running with the Kenyans by chance, and it was just a really interesting book, or Moneyball years before it became a film. And I just think it's a great way to tap into the expertise of other people, as opposed as a simple way of putting it in. Podcasts, I've always got a podcast on. I probably dement my girlfriend because I've always got a podcast in my ear. And it's just a great way of, I suppose, broadening your horizons and listening to far more clued up people.
Yeah, great. And what are you up to just now then, Kenny? What are you keeping busy with just now?
I left Hibs in March on the back of my younger brother, as I said, going to Commonwealth Games, and Leanne Dempster, who was the chief executive. I was really close to her on the back of her leaving, so bit of a transitional period at the club. And there was a few things I fancied pursuing, so leaving gave me the opportunity to do a bit more for 442 Magazine again. So I've done some freelance writing for them and Nutmeg, another quality publication that tells Scottish football stories in a really good way. And I suppose it comes back to being that versatile, not particularly great at anything, but can do a few things. I'm doing a bit of freelance consultancy work for clubs, players, creative agencies. So no, the variety and the choices has been good. So yeah,
So,
I'm still in a wee bit of freelance honeymoon period. So if you ask me in a year's time, it might be the worst decision I ever made, but I'm enjoying it so far.
okay, I've got 442 beside me just now, so I'll go and pick it up and see if you have fear in it. So, if anyone wants to catch up on your work and what you're doing, Kenny, what's the best place to go? Is it 442, or where can they get you on the net?
Probably Twitter is probably my hub. So it's at Kenny_Miller, Miller with an A, posh spelling, on Twitter, and then and take it from there. But yeah, all over the place. And I suppose just the same as I was at 5, 10, 17, just enjoying Scottish football.
Brilliant, Kenny. And thanks very much for your time, and I hope we catch up in person soon. Take it easy.
Always a pleasure, Don. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers, Kenny.